Okay, so now let me get my notes here. Okay. Okay. Ready to go. So this meeting is being recorded. We have a hearing on an application by Robert Recchia for the issuance of a comprehensive permit under General Laws, Chapter 40B, Section 20 through 23, for parcels on Trout Brook Road, Chickering Drive, and Edgewater Drive. First step is reading of the notice of the hearing, unless it's waived. Is there any objection to waiving the reading of the notice?
No.
Hearing none, the reading is waived. So the applicant here is Robert Recchia. He is the owner, as I understand it, of the parcels. He is represented by Lynn Sweet, Scott Goddard, and various other people. We are also joined by Kristen Gagalis, who is town council. I wanted to take a minute to describe the 40 process for those who may not have been familiar with it before. The Board of Appeals acts as the one board with permit granting authority under 40B. The idea is that the process of getting normal town approvals from various boards like the Board of Health and the Concom is streamlined so that the Board of Appeals is the only permit that they need. They still have to get, that the applicant still has to address issues, as I understand it, with the Conservation Commission concerning wetlands, but they do it under the state standard rather than local standards, which might be more strict. And the Board of Appeals in a 40B process has limited authority to deny waivers from local rules. In addition, the Board of Health can comment on Title V issues, but it has no direct authority to act on any of those issues with respect to the applicant. In terms of deadlines, once we open the hearing, as we're doing tonight, we have 180 days to close the hearing. After that, there's 40 days for the board to issue its decision. After that, there's a 20-day appeal period. The deadline for closing the hearing can be extended by agreement if necessary, which is sometimes the case in 40Bs that get complicated. The board is permitted to engage peer review consultants at the expense of the applicant. On the most recent 40B application that we had, we engaged two peer review consultants, an architect and an engineer. It's also likely that we will have a site visit. Anyone who's listening in, if they're not speaking, can mute their audio so that it doesn't interrupt the proceedings, please. So we're likely to have a site visit, and we'll schedule that at an appropriate time. What we want to do is focus early in this process on the most important issues, which we'll figure out as we get into it. If necessary, we'll ask the applicant to submit additional information. It may include graphics to address issues such as the height of the buildings involved, the setbacks, relationship to abutters, and so forth. The board has three options. Once it's time to make a decision, they can either deny the special permit, they can approve it as submitted, or they can approve it with conditions. It is permissible to attach reasonable conditions as long as they're consistent with local needs, but those conditions cannot make the project uneconomic. And those terms have specific meanings under the state regulations. The applicant, if they want to appeal any decision by the board, has the right to appeal to a Housing Appeals Committee. If the town or any other interested persons want to appeal the decision of the board, they would do so either to the Housing Court or the Land Court. It's possible we will ask the applicant to conduct a workshop to educate the general public about the proposed project. We will figure out whether we need to do that when the time comes. After we close the hearing, the board will deliberate. We'll discuss potential conditions. There will be requests, there are requests from the applicant for waivers of various requirements under local bylaws. We will review those and determine the extent to which we will grant those waivers, and then we'll vote on whether to grant the special permit and whether to impose any conditions on a permit that is granted. And once that happens, we'll issue a written decision. I wanted to ask at this point our town council whether there's anything I haven't said that ought to be said at this point. Kristen?
No, I think that was a great summary, great setup.
Okay. So what we'll do at this point, we will, at appropriate points, provide an opportunity for members of the town officials, members of town boards, or the general public to ask questions or make comments. And when the time comes to do that, I will so indicate. But we will start by having the applicant make a presentation of exactly what it is they're seeking to do. And then they will be available to answer any questions that members of the board have, and then we'll go from there. So who on the applicant? Lynn, are you gonna do the presentation for the applicant, or?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Fryer. It's nice to meet everybody. We're happy to be here and looking forward to going through this process and answering any questions you have. I'm joined tonight by Scott Goddard of Goddard Consulting, and I'm going to share my screen. And I apologize for the cat. We got 3 weeks before COVID, so every time I start a Zoom call, she comes in. Anyway, I'm with LDS Consulting Group. I'm based in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and just wanted to make sure everybody can see my screen.
Yep, I can see it.
Terrific. So this is a really unique project that we're very excited about, as is Mass Housing, who is the subsidizing agency and granted the project eligibility letter on this. Essentially, it is a 3-home project over, a 4-home project over 3 lots. All of the homes are 4-bedroom homes. One of them will be affordable at 80% of AMI. And so we have recently submitted some plans that have some colored renderings on them. So that's what you're seeing here today. We have 2 different house models. 2 of them will have garages on the front, and 2 of them will have garages on the side, but essentially the square footage is the same. And to follow within the rules of 40B, the houses need to look the same on the outside, whether they're a market rate home or an affordable home. So if you're walking by the home, you won't know whether it's affordable or not. This is just a list of our team. Unfortunately, our engineer had a family conflict tonight, Daniel American of Legacy Engineering, but we are sure that you're going to want to meet him in the future and potentially review the plans that he's submitted. And as well as our architect is on vacation this week. So we'll do the best we can without them tonight. With a 40B, and Alan did a fantastic job of summarizing the process. We started the process back almost a year ago. And we had to revise the plans. And a lot of that had to do with some of the engineering work that we did and where we could site the houses. which is how we ended up with the two different types of architectural plans. And once we got our final plans submitted, the town did have an opportunity to submit comments. There were none submitted, but we did have an opportunity to go on a site walk. And we did meet, I believe, somebody from the planning board and a couple of the other boards. So we got some early feedback from them about items that we should be looking at. And we're very happy to entertain another site walk when you feel you can make time in your schedule, make ourselves available. And so the first step in the process was getting what's called a project eligibility letter from a subsidizing agency. In this instance, it's Mass Housing, and they made their 7 findings, and we received the project eligibility letter this spring. Alan did a great job on the ZBA process. I won't go through it. If for whatever reason the town feels it wants someone else sitting at the table, there is every 40B application that goes in pays into a technical assistance fund, and Mass Housing Partnership operates that fund. And sometimes for municipalities that might know how to have a planner, or maybe they have a gazillion things on their plate, you can tap into about $15,000 and have Mass Housing Partnership provide you someone to sit next to you on the table and help answer questions along the way. But Alan did a great job of going through the process. If and when a comprehensive permit is issued, the project actually goes back to that subsidizing agency for what's called a final closing. And it's at that point that a regulatory agreement gets signed, and that regulatory agreement can just be with Mass Housing, but the town can also join into it. And that's basically what documents the permanent affordability restriction on the one affordable unit. And then every year after that, once the unit is sold, Mass Housing will appoint a monitor and will be checking in on the owners to make sure that everything is being done properly to ensure the long-term affordability of the unit. So we don't just get the unit built and nobody, there's an eye kept on it, which I think is really important. That's a really big change that's happened with affordable housing with restrictions in the last 10 or 15 years, is the ongoing oversight. What we're really asking you to do at the end of the day is some very simple things, which is to say that, yes, indeed, the developer applicant has site control, that we have followed the statute that applies to this, that the town is essentially open to it in the sense that they are below 10% in as far as the subsidized housing inventory. I think at this point, the inventory just came out like 2 days ago. Dover's at 2.26%. Dover's not a certified community, even though you have, I think you've recently done a housing production plan, if I've got my communities right. And at the end of the day, that our project is consistent with local needs within the meeting of 40B. 40B, it provides an opportunity where there's a regional need for affordable housing to work with the project so that that may bypass local concerns. And you'll see later on in our presentation, you're like, well, what are those local concerns? So some of the, in this particular instance, mainly what we're looking for is some relief, I believe, around the wetlands bylaws. I think a lot of our dimensions actually comply with the town's zoning. And so most of the lots are an acre or more. And as I stated, one home will be permanently income restricted. That means it never goes away. And all of the houses have garages. And there's a slight difference between the interiors on the affordable homes and the market rate units. Not as much of the affordable unit is built out. And that's really what the difference is. But it's within the footprint. For example, the basements are not going to be finished in the affordable home. Over the garage is not going to be finished. What might be a half bath could be a closet, but it's not going to be discernible from the outside. And basically, we have to essentially show that there is a regional need for affordable housing. And one of the items that we look at is cost burden. And cost burden essentially means that 23% of homeowners in Dover are paying more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. And housing costs are mortgage, real estate taxes, insurance. So that's almost like a quarter of households are paying below, more than what HUD says is what you should pay to maintain your home. And then there were some items within the 2021 Housing Production Plan that we also felt our project follows, which is the incentive for smaller homes. And I had already mentioned that one home will be eligible for the subsidized housing inventory. The unit will be sold, and I apologize, I see a really big typo here. Sorry about that. The homes will be sold by a lottery. Unfortunately, because it's only one unit, the state with one unit does not allow for a local preference. If there were more units, 70% of those units could have a local preference. So there'll be one lottery for one unit for households that will qualify at the 80% of area median income. The Mass Housing, which is a subsidizing agency, will be approving the purchase price for that. So there's going to be oversight on that as well. And as I mentioned, annual monitoring as well. And we like this project because we do feel that the homes are smaller than the average home in Dover and the average home that's being built in Dover. So we feel like not only are we providing an affordable home, we're also providing on the market rate home, potentially a more affordable home than you're seeing on some of the newer, larger builds. So we do think that this model of housing is going to be attractive to people entering the market and people that might be downsizing and want to stay in the community. And that it might attract people with a more diverse background. And as I mentioned earlier, the lots are pretty much similar in size to most lots. However, what these lots do have is a bit of wetlands, and Scott will talk to that as well. So in case you're wondering, where are they? So there's one lot here. This lot here is going to have the side garage on Chickering. And then there's two lots here on Trout Brook. These lots are going to have the front entrance. So this is basically we're reconfiguring these two lots. And then another front entrance home is going to be over here on Edgewater. And so they're within the same, we feel they're within the same neighborhood. And we think that that's what allowed Mass Housing to feel good about this new model of scattered site housing and not concentrating everything in one place. So most of the lots today, and you can see that there's been some testing done on the sites, are wooded with a little bit of clearing on them. And evidently a power pole that's leaning a little bit. The designs we tried, we tried to sort of do a farmhouse kind of a design with tones that we felt were more natural, you know, being one with nature, so that they wouldn't really stick out because they're on the more towards the front of the lots because the wetlands are in the back. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each individual plan. If you decide you want to hire an architectural peer reviewer, I'm sure that they're going to, you know, look at that. But I did put in some of the typical exterior materials. I think it's important that we try and build something that blends in with the character of the neighborhood and the woods and the earth tones. And so this is just some of the different architectural features of the home. And a typical layout for front loading. This is the one affordable unit, and you'll see that there's unfinished space here, and that's really all that's going to be different about the interior on it. And then this is it says front garage, but I think it's side garage. So this is the side garage entrance as well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the plans, and as I mentioned, the market units will have an opportunity for a basement finish. And I'm now going to turn it over to Scott, who is going to talk a little bit about infrastructure, which we know is really important to everybody, about where we've cited the wells and septic matters and stormwater and so on.
Yep, Scott Goddard here. So I'm a professional wetlands consultant, and I see that Janet from the Conservation Commission's office is on the phone call as well, so that's good. And Janet can know that we'll be coming in quite shortly with 3 notice of intent applications for work within the wetland buffer zones. So Dan Merrican from Legacy is the civil engineer. He's not with us tonight and will likely be present at a future hearing. But since this is introductory, I can present the plans. We have designed the site plans to have the 4 lots operate independently. They all have their own septic system. They all have their own well on the respective lots. There were the 2 lots along Trout Brook Road, which would have some slight lot line reconfigurations. Hey, look at that. And this is the intersection of Claybrook Road and Trout Brook Road. So we have conducted on not just this site, but all the sites, witnessed septic testing with the Board of Health. So what you're seeing in these renderings are appropriately designed septic systems that comply with Title V requirements. We've also designed the houses and the grading and the septic systems to not have any direct wetland impacts, which we're happy about. We are proposing work within wetland buffer zones under state law that is within a 100-foot buffer zone to the wetlands. We'll be seeking a waiver from the setbacks required under Dover's local wetland bylaw, which are more stringent than state law. So that's probably the most significant waiver request in this process. This is the other adjacent lot on Trout Brook. They sit right next to one another, these two lots. We also have stormwater management to the maximum extent practical on these lots. That we're not subject to stormwater under state law since it's only 4 lots, but we have made efforts to incorporate stormwater management on all of these properties. So if you keep going, I think, Lynn, to the next one. This is the lot at the intersection of Chickering and Trout Brook. There's an existing gas line that runs through the front of the property. That gas line will not be directly impacted with any excavation or anything that's a concern. And we are also keeping outside of the wetlands along the rear of the property, but we'll be working within the buffer zone as its own septic system and its own well. And then I think we have one more plan.
We do.
And this one is a little bit further down the street, but in the same neighborhood. This is Edgewater Drive. Edgewater Drive backs up against also a wetland. Trout Brook to the rear is present on site. We have had all these wetland lines confirmed by the Conservation Commission through a formal ANRAD process. So we know what we're showing you is representative of something that's been field confirmed by peer review. This also has an easement that runs through the property. It's in between the house and the septic system. There is a storm drain system that discharges some street drain out to the wetlands in the rear of the property. So we have the septic system on one side of that easement and the house on driveway on the other side. So we've kept this lot to minimum impacts around the buffer zones on this lot as well. So I think all these lots can be fairly readily demonstrated to meet Title V and Wetland Protection Act permitting processes. We intend to follow up after this initial ZBA meeting with filing the Conservation Commission notices of intent so that those processes can run somewhat in parallel. We, yeah, I think that's the thrust of the presentation. Lynn, if there's anything else you want to add.
No, I think that that was really helpful. Again, this is just an overview. This is the view from the street line of the side garage, and we're happy to entertain any questions the board has for us this evening or the public, and talk about what type of peer reviews you might be interested in and schedule a site walk. And we really appreciate your time this evening.
Lynn, thank you. That's helpful presentation. I just wanted to mention, we do have approval from Mass Housing Partnership for a technical advisor, and Judy Barrett, who had also advised us on our previous 40B, is being retained to do that.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Did she do a training or anything like that?
Well, some of the members, the 3 out of 5 board members were on the previous 40B, so we've been through it pretty recently.
Okay.
We'll talk about whether we need to do that for the other 2, which might be a good idea. We also, I'm sure we'll want to do engage 1 or more peer review consultants. We clearly need to deal with the wetlands issues. We may, as you mentioned, we may also want to engage an architect to look at some of the design issues. Do you plan to provide more detailed design information at some point?
We weren't planning on it because these are essentially single family homes. So, versus like an apartment building that is going to go, higher and whatnot. So we had not planned on doing anything more on architecture. We contemplated if kind of it's the will of the board. We thought it might be helpful to file with the Concom so that the peer reviews could sort of be happening in parallel with the same person. There is some precedent that, about not filing until after you're done with the ZBA. But we think in this particular instance that these are homes. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at potentially also filing with, with Board of Health, thinking that if Board of Health is reviewing it, again, if there's any issues that they see around the septic, we can bring those back to the ZBA.
Okay. Well, I think it's your decision how you want to handle the various boards and the processes. We'll do whatever we can to make it as smooth as we can from our side of the process. One question I had, a couple questions. You mentioned that the affordable home will have less finished space than the market rate units. I noticed from your drawings that the second floor on the market rate units has the primary bedroom over the garage, but on the affordable unit, that's not the case, which means that the 4 bedrooms are all smaller in size than in the market rate units. Is there a reason for making the upstairs smaller like that?
It is economically driven, and it's also driven by the fact that it's less space for the affordable homeowner to heat and to air condition and to clean. So with home ownership, it's trying to find a balance. The bedrooms meet or exceed sanitary, code requirements. That's something that we're very, very cognizant of. But the affordable homes will be selling, for probably a quarter of what the market rate homes will be selling for. There's some interesting things going on with economics right now. The interest rates have gone up so much that they impact the ability of what you can sell the affordable homes for. So it is pretty typical to do a starter grade finish in an affordable home and allow the market rate. Pretty much anyone can do upgrades on that. But if an affordable homeowner does want to finish additional space, they can, if they can, afford to do that. But we try and minimize the space to make it more economical for the purchasers of the units, while keeping in mind, what the sanitary code requirements are.
Okay. And if I understood you correctly, the basement of the market rate units will be finished, but not the affordable unit? Is that right?
Correct. If, again, it is up to the purchaser, whether of the market rate units, whether they want to finish their basements. We have created an opportunity for them to do that. The issue with an affordable home about finishing additional space is that when they go to resell the home, they cannot be reimbursed for doing that work. The only things that can go into the resale price of an affordable home is any capital improvement that has to deal with health and safety. For example, if they had to replace the hot water heater, really important to be able to have hot water in a home. That could be added on to the purchase price. The purchase price is very formulaic, and I'm happy to send that formula along if you think it would be helpful, but it's based on 70% of 80% of median income. And a third of that is what they can spend on housing costs. And those housing costs are your mortgage and interest, your real estate taxes, and your insurance, and in some instances, private mortgage insurance. So that's how you set the initial price. And when you resell it, it still has to be affordable at that 80% of AMI. And the capital improvements that are allowed to be considered in resale are essentially need driven. So there are instances when people choose to finish space on their own with the understanding that they want to live there for a long time. And it's, they're not necessarily looking for a return on it.
Okay. Thank you. One other question. Most 40B, I think 40Bs that I've seen before are done on a single parcel. Here you've got 4 separate parcels. Is it clear that that's permitted under the state process?
The project eligibility letter is proof that the subsidizing agency has approved the scattered site because they're within the same neighborhood. If they were on different sides of the town, that would be somewhat problematic.
Okay. One thing, when we do engage peer review consultants, we ask the applicant to provide funds in advance to be held in escrow by the town in order to pay the invoices of the peer review consultants as they engage and spend time on the project. Is that a problem for you folks?
Not at all. We usually give $5,000 or $10,000 depending on the different types of peer reviews. As Scott mentioned, we voluntarily did a stormwater management plan, which you typically do not provide on single family homes. So if you identify during this meeting what type of peer reviews you want, we can have Scott or our office send in a check to be put into, I think it's the 53G account, to be put on deposit for use towards the peer reviews.
Okay. Other members of the Board of Appeals, anybody have questions at this point?
I have a couple of questions. Have
Sure.
these parcels been perked yet? Have they already passed the perk test?
This is Scott. So yes, perk tests were performed. They were done by a certified soil evaluator, witnessed by the Board of Health. And
Okay.
the design of the systems are based on passing perk tests. So yes.
Because we know that there's a lot of water down there. This year we've had water. I had to empty my pool 3 times.
Yeah, no
has it-
question. I mean, there's wetlands nearby, and we had to make sure that our percolation tests were appropriate distance away from the wetlands.
And so I also noticed that the gentleman, Mr. Recchia, lives in, where does he live? I just lost it. So how do you find lots like this? Do you just drive around town and say, hey, look at that lot, maybe we could build a house there? I mean, how do you find these properties to do these 40Bs on? It's a mystery to me.
Well, I think in this case, these were properties that were, I believe, owned by a family member or in-law that had sort of passed them along to him. So they've been in his family of sorts, I think, for quite some time, or at least there was some relation between him and prior owners. And, you know, for all, I didn't research the history, but it may go back to the original creation of this this neighborhood. I'm not quite sure of all the sales history here.
Scott, if I could interrupt, Scott, actually, it's a little bit different from the application materials. They include the deed by which Mr. Recchia acquired these parcels. It's a single deed for all 4 parcels, and he bought them from Harvard. My guess is that somebody owned them previously and willed them to Harvard, and Harvard presumably didn't really have a use for them. So, and because they weren't buildable under zoning bylaws, they sold them at a pretty affordable price to Mr. Recchia. About 20 years ago.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my next question, was have any of them has any of these lots ever been tried to be built on? You know, try to pull a permit for any of these singular lots?
We are not aware of anything there is a safe harbor provision in the 40B statute that says if you filed for something within a year, there's a cooling off period. We're not aware, since we've been at this process for more than a year, of anybody filing on this. And I'm looking at the deed right now, and it looks like this was deeded to him in 2004. I have to think presumably he must have had some relationship with Harvard, but we can dig into that just because it's kind of an interesting
I'm
question.
kind of curious how I didn't realize that they were all owned by the same person. Yeah, I guess that's the only questions I have. How much of the sale price of these houses going to be? Do you have any idea what the finished price is going to be?
Hang on, I can just take a look at what and obviously it's changing. The market is changing every single day. Just want to see what my last set of numbers was. So, you know, we're thinking, you know, 1.3, 1.4 is probably around what they might be. But
how much will the affordable one be at that rate? Like 800,000?
Oh gosh, no.
Okay.
I'm just looking, I just want to see the last date of which I did the numbers, which was December. So interest rates have gone up, therefore the purchase price is going to be lower than what it is. When I did it in December, it was 334,000. But interest rates are now at like it was only 6.3. They're at like 6.75 now. So again, we've got a permitting process to go through, and then we don't know what things are going to be like a year and a half down the road. But I'm thinking low 300s most likely for a 4-bedroom home. And that would be monthly housing cost of 2,600 for 2,644 is what that the monthly housing cost would be based on um, the median income at that particular point in time.
Other
Yeah,
board
I don't think you can rent a 1-bedroom unit for $2,644 right now, let alone own a home.
Other board members have any questions at this point?
Of the locations, which one is the affordable house going to be? Where's the affordable house going to be located?
I'm hesitating for the simple reason that they're, for privacy needs going forward. But at the end of the day, there is going to be a public lottery. So it will be, let me just flip my maps here. It's going to be one of the front entrance units. I'm just trying to get to my map. It will be one of the units on Trout Brook because those are the front facing units. Either what's currently lot 1 or 2.
Okay. Anything else, Nadir, Mike, anybody?
I mean, at the end of the day, that mass housing is going to tell us which is going to be the affordable. So I don't want someone to take this and just say, well, you said, just because everything has got to be kind of coached with, we're not the final decision maker here, the subsidizing agency is.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question for Lynn. Lynn, you're putting in 4 cookie cutter houses in a neighborhood, an older neighborhood in Dover, where almost every house is different than the next. Why are you doing that? Why don't you make them kind of a little different from each other so they don't stick out like a sore thumb?
That's a tough one. Part of it is that we have to make the outsides look the same to comply with the statutes, so nobody knows which is the affordable one. However, and 2 of them are different styles from each other. We can certainly talk to the architect about whether they can change up the colors or something like that. They are really large lots. All of the lots are well over an acre, and there's going to be a lot of woods around them. So I don't have a good answer for you, but if that's something that you want to see different coloring, because only 2 of them are going to be next to each other. The other one's going to be in a totally different neighborhood, and one is going to be on the other side of the street, down the street. But they may be able to do something with materials or colors. I don't know. I can ask.
Well, how about geometry? Change them up a little bit. I mean, we're focused on the affordable one, because nobody wants to be fingered for, owning an affordable unit in Dover. And quite frankly, nobody cares. So why don't you just make it different than, the other houses around it? And it's still affordable, it's still nice looking, it's stylish, and it matches the neighborhood, instead of being just another cookie cutter standing next to the one beside it.
So I would say, Mike, that's an interesting issue, and I think that's something we can discuss as we go forward. We can get input from our technical advisor and possible peer review consultants and see where that goes.
Okay. The other thing I want to ask is about the affordable unit again. You said that's going to be a lottery, and it's not going to be specifically tailored for Dover residents. And we talk about local needs. And one of the big local needs we have in this town is the children of current Dover homeowners can't afford to live in the town. It's a widespread problem. So why can't it be, Dover, young families, or, just people that want to be near their parents, give them first dibs on the affordable unit? I mean, why does it have to be local needs, with a broad brush, all over the state of Massachusetts?
Unfortunately, the 40B statute is very clear on this matter. the applicant is going to have to put together affirmative fair marketing, resident selection plan. And because they allow only a 70% preference or less, and there's only one unit, the state has made the rule that they do not allow local preference for one unit. So unfortunately, it's out of our hands. However, obviously, the town is going to have a lot of notice, about it, and an equal chance with anyone else applying for the lottery. I'm sorry, I can't give you the answer that I think I know you want to
Well,
hear.
well,
It's
you just-
it's
Sounds
statutory.
like local needs doesn't really mean local needs. It means, the whim of the state, what they think the local needs are. I mean, it just doesn't sound fair to people in the town whose children want to buy in the town. They could afford something like that. It's not, what you're suggesting is not a local need. And even though the bureaucrats in the state, the Mass Housing Authority, think that it's a good thing to open it up to everybody else, I think it's something that is to the detriment of the town or the people that live here that want their children nearby.
Mike, what I'm hearing from Lynn is that that the state rules dictate that no local priority can be given, and if that's something that we don't like, then we should be lobbying our state legislators or bureaucrats to change the rules. But as the rules stand now, from what Lynn is saying, we don't have any choice, and they don't have any choice.
Well, I guess, we have Judy, can she get in, put a bug in their ear and, kind of light the torch a little bit?
Oh, well, this is a question we can certainly ask Judy and make sure that she agrees with Lynn that that's what the rules are, or town council. We can confer with town council and make sure we understand exactly what the rules are and whether there's any flexibility there, or some way to modify the situation or adjust the situation to meet that kind of interest. But let's see as we get into the process, what the options are, and then we can go from there.
Okay, Lynn said something before I wasn't aware of, and it kind of bothers me. Said there's constant monitoring of the affordable unit. Why is that? What's the issue that's at hand that requires the state to monitor the unit?
It's once a year. We are a monitoring agent for over 300 units in the state. We do reach out to affordable homeowners and we ask them if they've made a capital improvement, if they've refinanced their property, if they want to know what the purchase price of their property is, if they're in foreclosure, and so on and so forth. So it's a yearly touch base with them. We also ask how many people are in their household. We want to make sure that they're not dealing with an overcrowding situation. Affordable homes do have oversight because we want to make sure that the owner doesn't do something that would impact the long-term affordability of the home. If somebody wants to refinance their home, they have to get the monitor's permission. If somebody wants to sell their home, they have to go to the monitor, and the monitor will resell that home to make sure that the party coming in meets the affordability requirements. If they want to do a capital improvement, we want to make sure that they aren't doing something that would impact, for example, the building code. We also need to remind them that their improvement may not be able to be included in the purchase price. So it's a once a year letter that goes out. Sometimes it goes in the mail. Sometimes for people that we've been working with, we send them an email. We also want them to know that we're here if they have questions. We get a lot of questions like, well, what happens if I die? What happens to my unit? Can my child live here? So it's actually really important to be able to make sure that the people living in their homes have the resources they need to support them while they're there. And again, don't do anything that could impact in the long-term affordability.
So
It's a good thing.
Do you have affordable units that get trashed by people that own them? Is that the problem?
We're not going and looking and inspecting people's units. Homes have wear and tear. We've had some that are in condo associations, and sometimes someone's done something in violation and we're able to, you know, kind of help facilitate that as well. You know, the town has rules and regulations for anybody living in a home. And if there are concerns, there, you know, they can be addressed. But I am not aware of any homes that we've overseen that, you know, that have been trashed. Most people are really happy and grateful to be in a home. And I know Dover has affordable homes because we actually oversee Dover Farms. We're the monitoring agent for that, which I think is probably going on close to 10 years at this point. So I can't give you an example of that, but I can say that I think it's important for someone who buys a home that has these kinds of restrictions to be able to have a contact when questions arise.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Scott Goddard. Scott, where's the river with respect to these homes?
So if you want to bring up, Lynn, the map of the Trout Brook Edgewater Drive lot, that was the last one in the mix. It's probably best to look at it from that graphic if you're able to reshare your screen. But so if there's the river isn't close to the three other lots, it's only close to this one, and the river is referred to as Trout Brook. It does flow toward the Charles River. It does eventually get there. The map shows a label of something called Trout Brook, but there's the main bank of the stream is what's shown in those dark squiggle line across the rear. Yeah, right there. But we actually mark a different feature called mean annual high water, which is a series that's much closer to the wetland edge. Lynn, can you just move your hand cursor just down to the left a little bit? Up, up, up. Yep, that line right there. That there is the mean annual high water of Trout Brook, even though the main channel is a bit further interior.
So that's the riparian line?
Yep, so the riparian line under the wetland regulations would extend 200 feet from the edge of Trout Brook.
What about the 150-foot buffer zone from the edge of the river as it extends toward the lot? Do you have that delineated on the drawing?
So are you referring to boundaries set under the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act, or are you referring to Dover's zoning setbacks?
I'm not sure if they mirror each other. I'm talking about probably the Dover zoning, the one I'm all familiar with.
Yeah, I think I don't think we have that line shown on here. It would extend probably out to Edgewater Drive if we drew 150 feet on here.
So
Okay.
Scott, if this is 200, wouldn't 150 be inside of that?
No, that's not 200. That's 0, and we would measure off of that.
Off of that?
And that would be the measurement under the Mass Wetland Protection Act boundary, which is a little different than, and under Mass Wetland Protection Act, we would measure 200 feet for what we call a riverfront area. The 100-foot zone gets a little bit more protection, quite a lot more protection than the second 200 feet. There's a specific exemption for pre-96 lots, which is what this lot would fall under. So we're allowed to do the work within that 100-foot inner riparian zone. Then Dover does have a zoning consideration around Charles River, Claybrook, Trout Brook, and a few others, I think, where it's lists 150 foot of a consideration under the zoning bylaw. I don't have that memorized in front of me of what those prohibitions are, so we can maybe take a look at that and see if that also needs to be included as a waiver. or if this project is compliant with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Scott,
You've been
Scott,
before this.
let me interrupt you a second. Scott, I want to make sure I understood your last comment. What would you need a waiver for, possibly?
Isn't there, and maybe Janet knows this more readily. I think somewhere is in the zoning bylaws, not in the wetland bylaws in the town of Dover, there's a reference to zones within 150 feet of certain significant rivers in town. The Charles River, Trout
Right.
Brook, Clay Brook, for example. I just
Yep.
don't, I don't have them in front of me. I can't recall what those
Yeah,
prohibitions.
we've dealt with that 150-foot bylaw with respect to lots that are within 150 feet of the Charles River itself. Lately, I'm not aware that we've dealt with that for any other body of waters, but
Yeah, I'll need to go back. I'll need to double check that.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Scott,
Right,
you've been before. Scott, you've been before this board before?
Not the zoning board that I can recall, but certainly the Conservation Commission. I mean, I may have been in the past. I've been in as a wetlands professional for nearly 30 years, so I may have come across the Dover ZBA from time to time, but not in a regular capacity.
Because we were doing a lot on Claybrook at one time, and I thought that you were the gentleman representing the guy trying to get the lot to be buildable. So, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure I did, but I don't recall if that came. I've worked on many dozens of properties along Claybrook Road over the years, mostly in a capacity of the Conservation Commission, but there may have been a time that I have had to come before this board.
I just remember you were the voice of sanity and reason.
Oh, thank you.
Scott, let me ask you this. There is a stormwater report that was part of the materials submitted. Are there any brief points raised by the stormwater report that we ought to be aware of at this point?
Hang on, I do have a couple of notes on that Dan left in my hands.
Yeah, and I have the same notes, Lynn, and I can comment on it really briefly.
Perfect.
We're not subject to the Massachusetts DEP stormwater standards as typically you would be under a planning board submittal or under the Mass Wetland Protection Act when you're off 4 lots or fewer. So this is a 4 lot or fewer. So arguably this project could be put before not only this board, but also the Conservation Commission with 0 consideration for stormwater and be in compliance with the Mass Wetland Protection Act. Instead of taking that position, we have noted that, we have zone 2 considerations that we had to give some thought to. So we wanted to meet the stormwater standards to the maximum extent practicable. So the way that was done is by incorporating underground infiltration systems that capture all the driveway and roof runoff so that we can meet the recharge and water quality standards, which is Massachusetts has the 10 stormwater management standards. That's standard 3 and 4, which are the primary considerations whenever you're dealing with a zone 2 for drinking water wells. What the standards that are really unable to be achieved would be peak rate of control, because it's just not practical due to the relatively small size of these projects and parcels that we're dealing with. So, but everything else is pretty much standard fare and nothing to be concerned about. So we believe from a professional and design perspective, it's been done responsibly and to above and beyond what the standards call for.
Thank you. Kristen, Town Council, do you have anything you want to say at this point?
I don't have anything particular to add at this point, no.
And one more, just follow up if you don't mind. I think earlier it was mentioned that sort of a not insignificant percentage of the lots were in had wetland kind of areas. I guess, do you have a sense of what the percentage on those lots are sort of in the wetland space?
I don't think I don't know if I measured from a percentage, but I'll guess, fairly just off the top of my head, probably 35%, a third of the lots I would say are wetland areas, and 2/3 would be buffer zone or non-wetland areas. That's approximately correct.
We may have that from the original project eligibility application. Although I think things might have moved around a little bit, but we did need to put in percentage of wetlands and whatnot. If that's important, we'll look it up.
Great. Okay, at this point, I think what we probably want to do is find a date that we want to continue the hearing to.
Excuse me, Alan, this is
Was
John
there
Sullivan
anyone from the
Cons-
public or boards that you wanted to hear from?
Well, I guess we ought to see if there's any town board members that have anything they want to say.
Hi, Alan, this is John Sullivan from Conservation.
Hi, John.
And I just said we're obviously we'll get into the weeds when they come before us. But I did have a couple questions that I think tie in with the questions that have come before this. One of them was on the Edgewater Drive, and I guess most of these would be directed to Scott because they're wetland oriented. That has I believe that has a Army Corps of Engineer easement going along it. And I was just wondering, Scott, if that, what notification is necessary or if any is involved when doing a 40B in their area.
And that's a good question, John. You're right. There is Army Corps of Engineer easements and restriction areas in and amongst the portion of town we're working in. I think that, and I believe from other projects that I've done in those areas, we're only subject to notification to the Corps if we cross over their line, the line of their easements. And I think in this case, unless you have some data that I haven't seen, I don't think we're proposing crossing their lines. I think we're near but not in, I believe.
Yeah, so I think some clarification on that. I think the only one that really jumps out is Edgewater. Because I recall they had a fairly wide easement that went through there. And to be honest, I don't know what that easement actually entails. I just know that it has notification requirements. I don't know what the controls are beyond that. So I want to bring that up. The yeah, so you've just moved that down, Lynn. And there are maps out there that show that you wouldn't have them on yours, but it's just something to keep in mind. I guess another question I had is the 108 is typically the elevation, the grade is 108 is typically the floodplain down that neck of the woods.
Yep.
And I don't know when it changes. But do you know if there have been any recent changes or any proposed recent changes coming up to because of the increased intensity of rainfall over the last couple of decades? Any proposals of changing the flood lines along the Charles?
So, John, you have yet another good question. So it is a fair question to ask. I had not heard that they're proposing modifying the floodplain along the Charles in this part of town. It's not to say that it's not. Again, that might be some more local information if the town's been receiving info from FEMA for future modifications to their floodplain data. But regulatorily speaking, we went through an ANRAD process on this and walked down the boundaries of floodplain as part of that. So the lands were surveyed by a land surveyor, and we used the maps as they existed at the time of the applications. But beyond that, I don't have any on intel that would be helpful to know about future changes.
Just a thought, before you come in front of us, because a lot of your grading and the stone walls you have in place or proposed are basically to keep that at bay and not intrude upon the floodplain storage, because DEP looks over that pretty rigorously. let's see, the other question I had is for Title V, are there any setbacks for Title V to septic systems to BVW?
So sure, under Title V, they call for a 50-foot setback from wetlands for components to a septic system, and we
Mm.
comply with that in this case. We kept the work greater than 50 feet. In the town of Dover, there's local Board of Health regulations that extend that to 100 feet,
Mm-hmm.
which this does not comply with.
Mhm.
And this, that issue of the septic setbacks and also the wetland buffer setbacks, there was a question that came up earlier in this conversation from a member of the board about, have these lots ever been attempted to be built on before? And I think those two reasons probably
Mhm.
dictated the answer
Absolutely.
of that they haven't been considered buildable in the past. Because of the presence of wetlands, the setback requirements for construction of houses and for the septic system could not be satisfied on these lots. It couldn't fit.
And I noticed, so these don't appear to be raised systems. So you, based on the perk test, you're and the fact that you're using Title V and not Dover's Board of Health regulations, these are proposed to be in conformity with Mass Title V.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Yep. And no, I was just curious about the because we don't, obviously we don't encounter this because of our own regulations that often, and so the I didn't know what DEP's actual limit was. So 50 feet is something that you've reminded me of. And
And just to interject, if you don't mind, we have asked for a waiver of that 100-foot setback locally.
And let me just see what else. And I guess last thing, basically, Lynn, you were talking about, the efforts that are done to maintain the affordability is that in perpetuity?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And any deed is for, it's forever. And that's why we try and do the monitoring to make sure nobody messes that up.
And there's deed
Yeah.
restriction language at the registry?
Yeah, there's going to be a regulatory agreement that is two-way, at least with mass housing, could be three-way with the town, which I encourage because that way you get all the notifications. So that's one document that documents the long-term affordability. The second document is the deed rider that goes on the actual deed for the lot itself.
Well, thank you. And other questions I had, Alan, and others that I had basically brought up and addressed. I do have just a curiosity question. It's showing on Trout Brook a underground gas line, and is that for real? Because I don't think I've encountered one in Dover before.
Yes,
Does anyone know?
there's a gas line out there. It's well
Really?
staked.
Wow.
It's
So
you can see there's posts every, say 100 feet or something like that. It's cleared and maintained by the utility.
Well, so the question I didn't know is there are gas lines like that for supply, for large scale supply that don't get regulated down to pressure for access to houses. And I didn't know if that's one that actually is a low enough pressure to supply houses, or if it's one of their cross state supply lines.
My understanding is it's a supply line.
Really? So
We can confirm that with Dan and your DPW.
yeah, I mean, no, just a curiosity, basically, if there are any residents from the neighborhood or on who have gas, that would, so I was just curious. Because we deal with people wanting to put propane tanks within the buffer because they can't get natural gas. And so, or they're crossing a natural gas supply line or something like that. So it's just, it was the first time I've seen that on a plan in Dover.
And I don't think those Algonquin lines are for individual home service.
No. So
They're
I didn't know.
distribution lines.
Right.
Yeah, so I didn't know if this.
Too. Yeah, I believe it's just distribution and not.
Oh, okay, that's so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're showing a gas line. It looks like one going in to feed the house. not, tease off on the Trout Brook going to the second house in, or actually to both those houses. And if that's a Algonquin line, then they blow up. So I was just
I will talk with Dan on that. I think, as everybody knows, everyone's trying to move towards more sustainability. And a lot of homes that are going in are trying to use solar or heat pump systems and go to all electric. So,
it was
and
just,
try
yeah,
to
so I
not
was-
be reliant on fossil fuels. So I will,
Yeah.
I will track that question down. And if we need to erase some lines, we sure will.
Okay. So I was just, just curious. And then I just had, Janet Bowser, is our consulting agent, is also on it. I didn't know if Janet had any questions at this point.
No questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you much.
Any other town officials, board members that have any questions or comments?
Yes, Alan, this is Carol Lisbon.
Carol, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Chair of the Planning Board. Just one general comment and one specific comment. Relative to the FEMA maps for floodplain, we passed a new floodplain bylaw at our May 2023 town meeting. And at the May 2024 town meeting, we expect to accept new maps from FEMA that are supposed to be available late fall, early winter. So late 2023 or early 2024, that the town will have to accept. So I don't know if that changes anything from what was just discussed, but I did want everybody to know that there are new maps that are going to be coming out in the next, probably 4 or 5 months, and that will need to be accepted in May by the town. The other one is just a question for Lynn, just a general question. When I think about making sure that the 40B, that the affordable home is not apparent from the outside. Certainly the 40Bs that we have in Dover are such that there's not a lot of significant upkeep because the lots are less, or they're, in case of Red Robin, they're apartments. As a homeowner, I think we can all know about the expense of lawn care and snow plowing and landscaping and tree management, lots of storms, lots of tree limbs coming down and so forth. So I was wondering how that, if that plays all into any of the algorithm relative to affordability. And if not, what if any options the town has if an individual home becomes not kept up particularly well from the outside?
It's a tough one because these are going to be individual homes. They're not going to be part of a condominium. So I'm sure that they're homes that are not deed restricted, where people aren't happy with the condition of those. And I really don't know what the general ordinances are on the books for the municipality, but whatever applies to another home would apply to this home, whether it's a noise ordinance or a nuisance ordinance or something like that. But that is one of the reasons why they also try and price them at 1/3 of the income, so that they have that money. And that's why homes now, they're not doing units at 60% of AMI. They're doing them at 80% of AMI because they want the households living there to be able to have the resources to maintain them.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other town officials who have anything they want to say? Yes, I see Valerie.
Alan, I have one question.
Yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
Thank you. I think this is probably for Scott. From your perk tests, what did the water table show up at?
It was variable depths. The sites right along when you turn onto Trout Brook Road, those lots are kind of interesting in that the upland areas on them are historic fill. So you would go through like 4 feet of fill material and then go into the groundwater table. So it was say 4 feet down from the false grade of where the ground is today. The Chickering lot, probably, I mean, I don't have the notes right in front of me, but I was there during the perk tests. I think those were probably in around the 3 foot range, something right around there. And probably similarly, 3 to 4 feet out by Edgewater. So they weren't, none of them were super close to the surface. Because the land does slope up as you come up out of the wetlands and out of the floodplain. And so that's where the tests were done.
Thank you.
But on the flip side, they weren't incredibly deep either, right? It wasn't like we were going down 8 and 10 feet looking for water. It was within a reasonable, backhoe excavation effort.
Okay. So then will each of these homes have sub pumps? Given that the water table's a bit higher in this area?
No, the design as they stand right now is to set the foundations, above the groundwater table. So I don't think we're designed into the groundwater table. I'll double check that with the engineer, but that would be news to me. I'm pretty sure that was cited above.
I would think that maybe for the market rate home, at least, you might want to consider a sub pump to help them avoid flooding issues in the future. I would think that would be pretty costly for probably all the homeowners, but certainly for somebody buying I'm sorry, not the market rate, the subsidized home. I know that you've talked about making some adjustments to the subsidized home to make it affordable and manageable for them. So I would think maybe a sub pump would kind of help go along those same lines, keeping it affordable for long-term maintenance. And then one other question is, oftentimes, as you know, with wetlands, there's an order of conditions that is provided with the construction. Does the order of conditions get completed by the developer prior to the sale of these homes? Or would these homes be sold and then have the order of conditions finished afterwards? Or what percent of the order of conditions would be finished by the developer so that those costs are not passed on to the homeowners?
Well, that's a fair question. In this case, so I guess two things come to my mind. And since Janet and John are on the call too, maybe I can pose a question back to them. My intent here I was thinking that I was going to file 3 separate notices of intent, because there's basically 3 separate site locations. There would be one notice of intent for Trout Brook, because that lot stands on its own. One notice of intent for Edgewater, because that stands on its own. Sorry, Chickering, because it stands on its own. And then I think I might have said that wrong. So the 2 Trout Brook lots right on Claybrook, those are together. So I was thinking that would be one notice of intent. Then you go up the street to Chickering, that's the standalone lot, one notice of intent, all the way back to Edgewater, one notice of intent. So I would first ask the question to John and Janet if they think 3 notices of intent is appropriate for this application, or should I lump them all into one notice of intent application, which can also be done even for a scattered site. So that would be just a question for a quick conversation, I suppose, and I can do that offline with John and Janet if that's appropriate. But regardless, whether it's one or several orders of conditions get issued for this project, those get issued to the applicant, and the applicant, in so long as they have control over the property or ownership of the property, have the responsibility to comply with them. The orders of conditions are allowed to be transferred to subsequent owners. So if anybody wants to put an addition on their house or something and gets an order of conditions, that project can be sold, and that order of conditions can be transferred. So in this case, presuming that the applicant ends up building this project to its completion, they would, in theory, complete the orders of conditions. But if the project was sold, then the responsibility of those order of conditions would sell with the project.
I I just want to, Scott, I mean, most homeowners aren't going to close unless the order of conditions has been complied with, but there are things in that order of conditions that live on, like, lawn care. And, there's a handful of things that the owner is always responsible for. I don't know if that's maybe what you're referring to, that they live on. But for the
Right,
most
so-
part, the order should be complied with because the bank's not going to close on it. I think, again, I may be overstepping.
Yeah, so I guess there've been situations within our community where orders of conditions haven't been complied with and the home has been sold, and the new homeowner then faced pretty significant costs associated with that they did not foresee. So I would just, if possible, I would encourage some sort of an agreement, or as part of the negotiation through this process, that the town work with the developer to make sure that the vast majority that is able to be completed prior to the sale of the home is completed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I address a little bit of that, Alan?
Of course.
Oh, thanks. So, Val, generally, as Lynn mentioned, attorneys, and especially closing attorneys, generally don't allow things to proceed if there's a mortgage involved. If they do, there's usually money put into escrow. Very rarely, you may have an attorney who doesn't get adequate escrow. But that is a very, very rare circumstance. And the orders of conditions that we grant, I see no way that this would have an order of conditions granted for in its entirety. Each of these lots exist on their own, and they'll be and they go forward into the future as individual lots. So that's what we would expect would be individual orders of conditions there. And then we also have,
I also wonder if we should split up the two so that all four of them have their own order.
Oh, no, because unless they're going to be in joint ownership, absolutely. I view that.
Yeah, because they're going to go into separate ownership. I know it's a lot of work for Scott. It's a good time to ask the question.
Yeah, but it's no, just from the start that we would expect that, and we would we would have to be highly convinced otherwise.
Yeah, there's sort of there's a chicken and egg issue here, in the sense that the plan that is sort of redividing the lots doesn't legally exist until if and when, again, I don't want to make any assumptions, the comprehensive permit issues. So we're going to need to do some thinking around that too, because at least with the lots that are on Trout Brook, the other ones are fine.
So do they, because I just eyeballing, I thought, is it a 1 acre zone?
Yeah.
And so I didn't see, even though I didn't see a square there, I didn't realize that the lots themselves didn't conform, although you are changing. I see the change.
They're funky with the lines in them. So I think we need to get with Dan and see how we kind of deal with that issue.
And we'll work along with that. We expect that there'll be ordered conditions for the lots. The lots will have to exist. Because it's one thing, unless it were a condominium form of ownership or something like that, which far outscales Scott's the extra work Scott might have to do just for one extra lot versus a condo.
Yeah, I mean, under 40B, we can do what we're doing because this plan is part of the record. But I don't know that we can be an A&R lot for those two. And I've got to think about whether condominiumizing it is even worth it, sort of thing.
Well, we're
interesting questions.
We will always be here. And then our deed restrictions, Val, to address the final part, is we have tightened them up over the years so that it makes it very clear to closing attorneys that there is an outstanding order. In the past, they had a habit of ignoring them, and now that's we haven't. Issues have arisen because they no longer ignore them. They know they have to conform to things. So,
Great, thank you, John.
you're welcome.
So just to follow up on the conversation about A&R lots. So I don't know how the comprehensive permit impacts the A&R process that we have with the planning board. So if we could just make sure that that gets clarified as the process goes along. Thank you.
Mhm. And I'm just curious if I can ask again. So on Trout Brook, the double houses there, which appear to be, is that to be divided into two lots, or is it a division of lot 1 into 1A and 2, or 1A and 2A?
Well, there's currently there's two existing A&R lots that are situated on the corner of Claybrook Road and Trout Brook Road.
Mhm.
Maybe if you go all the way back to that one right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that lot 1, that's what exists today per like the town assessor's maps, for example.
Mhm.
We're only proposing 2 house lots on that collective site. However, in order to have the septic system and the houses on the same lot, the lots would have to be
Oh,
re-divided.
I see. Okay.
So that when I file a notice of intent, John, if I do it as 2 separate ones, each of those separate applications would include work on what is currently assessor's map lot, 1 and 2
Mhm.
in each case. They would,
Mhm.
there's overlapping assessor parcels. And those future lot lines are yet to be created.
I
Yeah,
see. So
So
that was
this one has
dictated by
is a funky little bizarre pork chop lot because the leaching field needs to be, down the road.
And that was done that way, not by preference, but out of necessity, because the only good soils were found in one portion of the site on what's the left side on this map here, or the corner closest to Trout Brook and Claybrook. So if you, as you went more to the south or to the right on the page, the soils got worse and were not suitable for a septic system.
Mhm. And
So we're
so,
basically clustering 2 houses to the right side, and then the 2 septics are clustered to the left side. But in order to get those septics and houses on the same lot, there would be a redivision.
I see. I actually had pulled up something that had been submitted last year on my larger screen, where you had the septic systems combined in the middle with a lot line going between those. And so I didn't realize that you changed those to
And that, I think
I'm gonna try and bring up the actual, oh no, it looks like all of the plans are separate. I don't have one overview site plan. But yeah, the testing happened between the Pell and this submission. So that's why.
That's right. So to your point, John, is that the sketch plan that you're referring to was an initial conceptual design of where the preferred septic locations would have gone, which would not necessitated a lot line change. But then when the soil testing was done, it didn't go quite as well in that location.
So that's interesting. So then basically in changing those lot lines, does that affect the grandfathering of the, or do you still come up with some conformity to zoning bylaws, or do you need it?
We don't need it because we're basically going to be waiving certain zoning bylaw, certain zoning regulations. That's what 40B allows us to do.
And the only lot that would have affected, John, is most critically is the Edgewater lot. That lot line could not change in order to comply with the wetland regulations, because we're going to be utilizing the pre-96 grandfathered exemption under the Rivers Act. And that exemption disappears if you change the lot line. So we're not changing the lot line at all for Edgewater.
Got it. So yeah, I all along I kept looking at the earlier plan and hadn't realized the septic locations had changed. But that for us, we'll address that when it comes in front of us. We'll the lot line issue is for the pleasure of planning board and ZBA. So.
Any other town board members or officials who want to say anything or ask any questions? Not hearing anything. Okay, so Kristen, is there anything we should do at this point other than pick a date to continue the hearing to?
Unless you wanted to have some sort of public comment, but no, you could pick a date to continue the hearing too.
Well, I thought for public comment, we could wait until later in the process when we have a little more information and we have some input from our peer review people.
Sure.
And leave it at that at this point. So we need a little bit of time to determine the extent to which we want peer review consultants and get them engaged and up to speed. So I'm thinking we probably want to go out in a month or so. And we already know we've got another matter we're trying to schedule that we don't have the board members all available the week, the Labor Day week. So that pushes us into the week of September 11th. Can we do Monday the 11th? Does that work for all the members of the Board of Appeals? I think it does.
I unfortunately am not available that night. I have a family commitment that I'm not able to change.
Thought I'd made notes, but I obviously didn't do it right.
I can do any other night that week. Or Scott can, depending on the topic, if you're doing stormwater, you may not need me.
No, we want everybody. So how about the 12th? Does the 12th work?
It works for me.
Everybody?
Yeah.
Perfect for me.
Okay.
Scott, does that work for you?
Yep, no problem.
Is it possible to because obviously we don't want to wait we want a peer reviewer hopefully to be found in the next couple of weeks. And I don't know if you need to delegate that responsibility to somebody. We're happy to put money in, but if someone isn't finding that peer reviewer, then we're basically losing 6 weeks with no forward movement. So I'm not sure logistically how you handle that. If you've got a planner or somebody on the board, or Judy, just didn't want to close the hearing tonight without having a better understanding of how you want to handle that so that we can be responsive.
What we'll do is I will let you know the details for advancing the funds to put in escrow with the town, and we'll do that promptly. And I would anticipate we will pretty quickly engage peer review consultants, whatever we decide we need to do after I talk with Judy about that. The septic and water issues, I think, are the biggest thing, and from the looks of it. So we would get somebody lined up there and get them engaged pretty quickly, so that we would have plenty of time for them to look at the submissions and give us some feedback and be ready to discuss all of that at the next session.
Terrific. We would ask that if you do get peer review proposals, that you do forward them on to us just to review so that we know, what the scope is. And as soon as you let us know how much you want us to put on balance, we'll get that over. We're close by. We're right down the street in Wellesley.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
And it does look like someone from the public does want to speak.
Someone wants to what?
Someone in the chat, and I don't, again, it's your meeting.
Right.
Was it Ed?
Well, why don't I I do know that there are people who want to say something, but I would ask that you wait until we get the input from our peer review people, and we'll entertain comments at the next meeting, at the next session of the hearing. Okay, so I will entertain a motion to continue the hearing to September 12th at 7 p.m. via Zoom.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second,
All in favor?
Guy,
Okay, so we're continued to the 12th of September, and Lynn will be in touch with you in the meantime as we discussed.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Great questions. We'll see you next month.
Yes, thank you for your input, and we'll move forward with the process and see how it goes. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
second.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.